You know that feeling, that little twinge in your shoulder when you reach up high? It's surprisingly common.
It really is. Shoulder pain hits a lot of people. Statistics suggest, somewhere between 7% and maybe up to 36% of us deal with it at some point.
Wow, that high. And often you hear terms like rotator cuff problems or impingement thrown around.
Exactly. Rotator cuff tendonitis, subacromial impingement. Those are definitely frequent culprits when people start having shoulder trouble and, want some answers.
And that's exactly what we're digging into today. We're looking at kinesio tape, KT tape, as maybe a short-term help for that kind of shoulder pain.
Specifically for that rotator cuff tendonitis or impingement scenario, yeah.
And the cool thing is, this isn't just guesswork. We're basing this on a research report. A listener shared a proper scientific study, a randomized, double-blinded clinical trial, actually.
Which is, a really solid way to test something. Randomizing people, blinding everyone involved. It helps cut down on bias.
Right. Helps you figure out if the thing itself is working.
Pretty much.
So our mission here is to unpack what this study actually discovered about KT tape for shoulder pain, especially like right after you put it on. And there's a bit of a teaser finding, isn't there? An immediate change in one specific way you move, but maybe not others.
Precisely. That's the really interesting part we need to explore.
Yeah.
But maybe before we dive deep into this study, it might help to just quickly touch on taping in general, in rehab and sports.
A good idea. Because there's the traditional stuff, right? That stiff white athletic tape.
Yeah, the really rigid kind. That's mostly about limiting motion, providing that external support, locking things down almost.
Okay. And kinesio tape is different.
Totally different philosophy, really. It's much newer, super popular now.
Yeah.
The key thing is it's designed to mimic skin.
Mimic skin. How so?
Well, it's about the same thickness as the epidermis, the outer layer of your skin. And it's stretchy, but mostly just lengthwise, about 30 to 40% stretch.
Ah, so it moves with you, not against you.
That's the idea. It's also latex-free, uses an acrylic adhesive that needs a bit of heat, like rubbing it, to stick well.
And the material.
It's cotton, so it breathes, dries out if it gets wet. That's why people can often wear it for, 3-4 days straight, even showering and stuff. Big difference from the old rigid tape.
Okay, so flexible, breathable, stays on for a while. Now, the people who developed it, Case and others, they had ideas about how it works, right? What were they thinking?
They proposed a few things. One was about sensory input. The tape constantly stimulating the skin gives your brain more feedback about your shoulder's position.
Like more awareness.
Yeah, proprioception. Another idea was maybe it helps align the fascia, that connective tissue layer. Or, by gently lifting the skin, it might create a tiny bit more space underneath.
Space for what? Reducing pressure.
Possibly reducing pressure on pain receptors or maybe helping with fluid movement like swelling or edema. And just the sensory aspect itself could theoretically influence how you perceive pain, like the gate control theory.
Okay, so a few potential ways it might work. Sensory, maybe mechanical, maybe fluid dynamics. Now let's get to this specific study. What was its main goal?
They wanted to know, does KT tape actually provide a real short-term clinical benefit for college kids with diagnosed rotator cuff tendonitis or impingement compared to just putting on some fake tape?
Okay, the classic comparison. How did they set it up? You mentioned randomized and double-blinded.
Right. So prospective study, they got 42 college students, 18 to 24 years old. They had to meet specific criteria like pain when lifting their arm below 150 degrees, positive results on specific shoulder tests, the empty can, and Hawkins-Kennedy tests.
Tests that point towards impingement or rotator cuff issues.
Exactly. And they had to have trouble with daily activities because of the shoulder pain starting less than 6 months ago. And importantly, no other major stuff going on. No fractures, dislocations, neck problems, recent surgery. A pretty defined group.
Young, active, fairly recent onset shoulder pain.
Yeah.
Got it. So they have these 42 students. What next?
Random assignment. Half got the real therapeutic KT application, half got a sham KT application, 21 in each group. Randomization helps make the groups comparable from the start.
Makes sense. So let's talk about the tape itself. What did the real KT application involve?
It was standardized, based on Cage's recommendations for this condition, and applied by someone certified. It involved a few pieces. First, a Y strip for the supraspinatus muscle.
That muscle that helps lift your arm out to the side.
That's the one. Applied with paper-off tension, so just the minimal stretch from peeling it off the backing while the arm was positioned behind the back.
Okay. What else?
Then another Y strip for the deltoid, the big shoulder muscle, also paper-off tension. The tails went to the front and back parts, applied with the arm in specific positions to target those muscle sections.
Right.
and finally an eye strip or maybe another Y strip, depending, with what they call mechanical correction. This one had significant stretch, like 50 to 75%.
Wow, that's a lot more stretch.
Yeah, applied with downward pressure right over the spot that hurt the most, with the arm positioned first in external rotation, then moved into flexion and slight abduction as the end of the tape went on, with no stretch. The idea was to maybe, create space or adjust tissues right there.
Sounds quite involved and specific. Okay, so that's the therapeutic group. What about the sham group? How did they make the tape fake?
This is interesting. They didn't just try to make it look identical but without tension. They'd actually tested a visually similar sham earlier, and people felt a slight skin pulling.
Ah, so it wasn't truly neutral.
Exactly. So for the actual study, they used 2 short 4-inch eye strips of the same KT tape, but applied with absolutely zero tension. One went vertically over the AC joint, top of the shoulder.
Where the collarbone meets the shoulder blade.
Right. And the other went horizontally across the outer part of the deltoid muscle. So tape was there, but placement and lack of tension were key differences.
And crucially, the students didn't know which version they got.
Correct. They were blinded, the researchers checked afterwards, and everyone said they didn't know their group assignment. So the blinding worked.
Okay, good. So, different taping, participants unaware. How did they measure if any of this actually made a difference? What outcomes were they looking at?
They measured a few things. Baseline, so before tape.
Yeah.
Then immediately after taping, except for one measure, and then again at day 3 and day 6.
What were the measures?
A big one was the SPEEDY Shoulder Pain and Disability Index. It's a questionnaire, 0 to 100 scale. Higher score means more pain and trouble with daily stuff. They decided a drop of more than 10 points by day 6 would be meaningful.
Okay, that captures the overall impact. What else?
They measured active range of motion, how far people could move their arm without pain, specifically forward flexion,
Arms straight ahead.
abduction,
Are out to the side.
and scapular plane elevation, sort of that diagonal lift. They measured the degrees right at the point pain started. An increase of 15 degrees or more was considered meaningful.
So how much pain-free movement they had?
Exactly. And one more thing. A VAS, visual analog scale for pain intensity, just a 100 millimeter line. Mark how bad the pain is right at the end of that pain-free movement. A drop of 20 millimeters or more by day 6 was deemed meaningful.
Got it. Pain score, pain-free motion, and pain intensity at the limit, measured over that first week.
Yeah.
So what happened? What were the big findings?
Okay, here's the headline result. The group with the real KT tape had a statistically significant immediate improvement in pain-free shoulder abduction range of motion right after the tape went on.
Abduction, so lifting the arm out to the side.
Yes. On average, they gained almost 17 degrees more pain-free movement in that specific direction immediately.
Wow. That's pretty specific, but noticeable. 17 degrees is quite a bit.
It is. If you're thinking about reaching sideways, maybe this gives you that little bit extra right away.
But just abduction. What about lifting forward or that diagonal movement?
Yeah.
Or pain scores?
And this is the crucial counterpoint. No other immediate differences between the groups. None for forward flexion ROM, none for scapular plane ROM, and no difference in the VAS pain scores immediately after taping.
Huh. So the sham tape had no immediate effect on anything.
Seems that way. It appeared pretty neutral right at the start, which is what you want from a sham.
Okay, so a very specific, immediate boost in side lifting motion for the KT group. What happened over the next few days? Did that advantage stick?
Well, here's where it gets even more interesting. By day 3, and then again at day 6, both groups actually showed improvement in all the outcome measures.
Both groups. So the sham group improved too.
Yes. Pain went down. SPADY scores improved. Range of motion in all directions got better for both the therapeutic KT group and the sham KT group. Many participants in both groups even hit those meaningful change thresholds they'd set.
Okay, so people were generally getting better over the week, regardless of which tape they got.
Pretty much. And the most important part, there were no statistically significant differences between the therapeutic KT group and the sham KT group on any measure. ROM, pain, disability at day 3 or day 6.
So that initial edge in abduction for the KT group just disappeared, or rather the sham group caught up.
Essentially, yes. By day 3, any significant difference between the groups was gone. While everyone tended to improve, the real KT tape offered no extra benefit over the sham tape across that first week.
That is really telling. An immediate, specific effect that doesn't translate into a sustained advantage. Did they look at anything else, like medication use?
They did. They
Yeah.
checked NSAID, used ibuprofen, naproxen, that sort of thing. It was similar in both groups, so the results weren't likely skewed by one group popping more pills.
Okay.
And they tried to control activity levels, too, asking everyone to limit upper body exercise for that week.
Right. Did everyone get better in the end?
Most did improve within about 4 weeks, generally. But interestingly, a few people in both groups still had persistent pain and needed more follow-up. Some of them were later found to have other issues like labral tears or trigger points.
Underlying problems the initial diagnosis might have missed.
Possibly. The researchers actually took those folks out of the analysis and reran the numbers.
Did it change anything?
Not really. The main findings held. There was like a fleeting statistical blip on VAS pain reduction at day 1, favoring the KT group slightly, but it wasn't big enough to count as a meaningful difference.
Okay. So, bottom line, that immediate abduction ROM improvement seems like the only real, albeit temporary, distinction they found. Any ideas why that might happen? What mechanisms did they speculate about?
Yeah, they kicked around a few possibilities, acknowledging it's speculative. One is the gate control theory. Maybe the tape's sensory input just dials down the pain signals for that specific movement right then and there.
Makes sense as a temporary effect.
Another thought was proprioception. Maybe the tape makes you more aware of your shoulder position during abduction, leading to slightly better control or less irritating movement patterns. But they did mention other research hasn't really shown KT tape significantly boosts muscle activation.
So it's probably not making the muscle fire harder, maybe just guiding it better.
That was another idea. Maybe it subtly guides the motion, reducing mechanical irritation just for abduction. And of course, you can't totally rule out placebo.
Especially since both groups improved over time.
Right. They stressed that we need more research to really nail down why that specific immediate effect occurred.
Understood. And like all studies, this one had limits, right? What did the researchers themselves point out?
A big one was no treatment control group. Since both groups got some kind of tape, you can't be 100% sure if the improvements were from tape, sham, or real, or just natural healing, or even the attention effect of being in a study.
Good point. What else?
The population was very specific. Young, active college students. These findings might not apply to older folks or less active people. They also mentioned the possibility of underlying undiagnosed shoulder instability in some of these young participants.
Which could affect how they respond to tape.
Could do. And finally, a statistical point for the ROM changes, the confidence intervals were a bit wide. They included 0, but also stretched past the threshold for a meaningful difference. It suggests the study might have been slightly underpowered to definitively rule out a very small clinical benefit.
Okay, so important context. Given all that, what's the practical takeaway for a PT or a doctor working with someone who has this kind of shoulder pain?
I think the main message for clinicians is KT tape might give you a quick, immediate bump in pain-free abduction ROM for these young, active patients, like right there in the clinic.
Yeah.
But this study provides no evidence that it's better than a sham application for reducing overall pain or disability, either immediately or over that first week. So you really have to weigh that very limited transient benefit against, well, the lack of broader or sustained effects found here.
Right. It's a tool, but maybe one with very specific, limited application based on this evidence.
That seems a fair summary of this particular study's findings.
So for our listeners, maybe someone wrestling with that shoulder pain right now, what's the distillation of all this?
I'd say the key thing is, this research showed KT tape could give an immediate short-lived improvement in just one specific shoulder movement lifting out to the side. But it didn't seem to offer lasting pain relief or better function compared to a fake taping over that first week.
So maybe helpful for a quick, temporary boost in that sideways reach, but probably not a magic bullet for the overall problem.
Based on this study, yeah, that seems about right. It's something you could certainly discuss with your physio or doctor, but manage expectations.
It really shows how complex the body's response can be, doesn't it? And highlights why we need these kinds of careful studies.
Absolutely. And the fact that the sham group also improved is fascinating in itself.
Yeah. What does that tell us?
Well, it makes you wonder, doesn't it, about the natural course of this kind of shoulder pain. Maybe it tends to get better on its own for many people in this group. Or maybe just the act of doing something, even putting on neutral tape, has some kind of effect. Placebo, attention, who knows?
It definitely muddies the waters about attributing improvements solely to the active ingredient of the tape.
It really does. It forces us to think about what constitutes a meaningful improvement. Is it just that immediate change you can measure? Or is it how someone feels and functions day to day over time?
That's a great point to ponder. So if you are dealing with shoulder pain, hopefully this deep dive gave you some food for thought. Definitely chat with your healthcare provider about what makes sense for your specific situation.
Always the best advice, personalize the approach.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.